Alrighty, so this is the audio review for Search 341 Study Guide Exam 3, Final Exam! Okay, so for the first part, Managed Heart Commercialization of Human Feeling by Hochschild. The first one, emotion work, just the definition she gives, right? It's when your private feelings don't mesh with how you're expected to act in a public setting. And typically this is seen in our expected roles at work, right? Where you're supposed to be like friendly and cheerful and smile and, you know, kind of put on this false persona of happiness and, you know, being bright. Even in situations where you don't feel that way, right? Or be very calm, like in the situation of the flight attendants, being very calm even though, you know, the plane is crashing, right? Those kind of things. Okay, the second one, just the idea that flight attendants are expected to modify their feeling states, right? And act. So part of the thing they talked about in the training exercises was teaching the women to see the people in the airplane cabin as if they are passengers in her own living room. Or passengers, I mean guests in her own living room, which is pretty ridiculous because most of our living rooms like aren't flying through the sky or like that narrow of a hallway with a bunch of weird seats in them all crammed in. But anyway, so this just meant that, you know, they had to, you know, be really, really friendly, you know, act as if these people are their friends in some sort of way, and really keep calm even when there's like turbulence or, you know, malfunctions in the plane and there could be a serious danger of a crash. They have to like not alert people and be like, oh my God, we're all gonna die. Like, right? That's how they had to modify their feeling states. Let's see. Flight attendants were asked to use terms of empathy, right, when talking to passengers that were angry about something. Things such as, I know just how you feel, right? Like, oh, my luggage didn't make it with me. I know just how you feel. Oh, now I have a terrible layover. I know just how you feel, right? This kind of thing that was hammered into these women to repeat the phrase, I know just how you feel, to try to express empathy with complaining passengers. The job is getting harder. All that means is that the conditions are getting worse on planes, right? Like if you've been on a plane lately, there's no such thing as legroom anymore. People are really crammed into each other to where like, even if you have like a normal human-sized body, your elbows and hips and everything else are pretty much in the seat of the person next to you. There are issues where airlines now charge for things that used to be provided, like pillows or meals or drinks or things of that nature. Sometimes they could run out of food, right? They could have problems with air conditioning. They could have problems where, you know, a baby's crying or something like that. So the more overcrowded the planes are now becoming, the more the airlines are trying to make more money by kind of shoving in a couple more seats into these already packed airplanes, means that the conditions are getting much, much worse. So the job is getting harder because trying to manage all of that negative energy and all the people complaining and all of that is much harder when like the entire airplane is miserable. Okay, moving on to panhandling repertoires and routines for overcoming non-person treatment. Let's see. The first would be just the way that he used a dramaturgical perspective to understand panhandling repertoires. So meaning, you know, he basically sees it in that kind of classic dramaturgical, like, someone is performing for someone else kind of thing, right? This idea that a panhandler develops a repertoire with which they use to kind of lure in the passerby, or the pedestrian in this case, to give them money. Meaning, there's this issue of non-person treatment, which kind of goes into the next question, right? That we basically, the majority of people are conditioned to not see the homeless, to kind of ignore them and walk past them. So just basically treat them like they're not a person. They're just like a street sign or a post or like a potted plant or something, right? And so the panhandling repertoire is the way where the panhandler as the actor tries to get the audience to pay attention to him as the, you know, passerby or the pedestrian. And so the repertoire is the performance that's put on to try to get the other person to realize that they're human, right? So that could be entertaining them, telling them a joke. It could be playing a, you know, instrument. It could be having a sign that conveys need, right? It could be providing a specific service for somebody, right? Those kind of things. Just to basically break people out of that routine of not seeing them as people, right? So let's see. Goffman's 3 types of interactions he also talks about. right? Non-person treatment, again, we already kind of went over that. Civil inattention, right, which is another one. And then, of course, what the actual panhandlers want, which is what's called encounter or face engagement, right, where you actually like listen and talk to the other person. All right, so for these three, I'm telling you of the 5 repertoires, the ones that you should know what they are, right? I'm going to ask you about these ones. So, the storyteller, right, is the one that they try to use stories to evoke understanding, pity, and guilt. And there's different kinds that we talked about, right, where there's people that are sign storytellers, people that, have kind of more elaborate long-term stories that they tell people that develop a rapport over time, right? Servicer is someone who provides a specific service in order to kind of lessen the awkwardness of the interaction and make it more like a business transaction, because people are comfortable with business transactions. Like, you pay for a service. So if you're doing the same thing, like one of the examples in the reading was providing the service of helping people find a place to park in a busy area, which, sounds kind of whatever, unless you've gone to Long Beach, in which case I would pay someone $100 just to be able to park my damn car like within 6 blocks of where I'm trying to go to. So yeah, providing a specific service so that it makes it more like a business transaction. People are getting something from giving that person money. And then an entertainer is typically someone who just provides humor and enjoyment. So this could be, there's 2 different categories of kinds he talks about, like the musician with the prototypical like open guitar case, right? And people just kind of walk by and toss in money. Or, jokers or performers of other kinds, right? People that dance, people that whatever, that exchange some sort of either humor or entertainment in some way for the money that they're receiving. All right, moving on to Rios's reading. So Victor Rios, blah, 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 stealing a bag of potato chips. The first concept he was talking about was how, like, a lot of the young men that he works with face this issue of misrecognition, meaning that the first part of it is that these young men think they're being respectful. So the example in the reading was how the young man that he was watching him do a job interview did not shake the white woman's hand that was interviewing him. And it was because he thought he was being respectful because, in the kind of racialized culture, it's, considered threatening for a black man to touch a white woman. So he thought it was kind of supposed to be that way, that he would, defer and not shake her hand because he didn't want to intimidate her or make her feel uncomfortable. But at the same time, in a job interview, it is completely normative within mainstream culture to shake hands with somebody. So there's this idea that they think they're being respectful to someone, but because of the social class differences and really just the cultural differences of not having social capital, cultural capital, means that these young men often think they're being respectful, but they're not interpreted as being respectful. Oftentimes, when they're trying to do the thing that they think is right, that they have been socialized to believe is the way they should behave, it actually ends up punishing or even criminalizing them, right? So, meaning that people don't see when they try. And when they do see them trying, they, have a misrecognition of what that attempt is, right? They might see it as disrespect instead of as respect. So it just means that it's almost like communicating in a different language, right? That there's conflicts that go on that have a lot to do with just not seeing, or just really not, the young men not understanding middle class values, and then the middle class people not understanding these young men's attempts to fulfill those middle class values. All right, so community cultural wealth is another concept brought up in the reading, which basically says that if you're in a marginalized community, you're deprived of social and cultural capital, right? So you have to find different ways to kind of promote knowledge within those certain, communities. So that's what's called community cultural wealth, right? Which allows people to kind of survive and resist that dominant narrative when you create worth of your own, right? All right, organic capital is just the idea that, again, because you're cut off from those mainstream cultural capital, social capital that say, like, follow these specific rules, get a job, this or that. Like, you have the story that he chronicles of the young man not being able to get a job after going to numerous job interviews. And then he finds that it's much easier for him to make profit by bootlegging movies. than by a legitimate legal job, right? So the idea that he sees it as this kind of organic capital, right? That he has blocked opportunities and that he's already being criminalized. So it becomes a situation of you might as well kind of almost fulfill the prophecy of what's expected because you're being cut off from those legitimate opportunities. Like you're not given the same, like he talks about the job interview itself, how the woman herself is very different, body language wise, everything else, with the male applicant that was white that came in after him than with him. So there's obviously like kind of the racial issues and tensions there as well. Also, you know, there's so many of those kind of stereotypes that permeate the culture when it comes to young men of color, you know, as criminalizing them. So there's this idea, though, that this kind of organic capital's really what people develop in the midst of not having social or cultural capital, right? That help guide them into what makes you successful. That what makes you successful when you're poor and you're marginalized is different than what makes you successful if you're middle class or wealthy or white. All right, so Quinny, he uses Quinny's argument of this acts of survival, crimes of resistance, talking about how some people engage in what he calls acts of survival, meaning, oh God, what a terrible example that I'm going to use, Aladdin, right? That's such a horrible example. Gotta eat to live, gotta steal to eat, right? That kind of thing. Oh, I can't believe I just did that. But anyway, you know, that idea, acts of survival, like if you steal baby formula so that your baby can eat, right? Or you're stealing food so that you can eat, or even just stealing items so that you can sell them to support, you know, paying your rent or your bills or whatever it might be. That's more of what he calls an act of survival. That because of that situation, it feels like the best way to deal with it is to, you know, do what you have to do to survive, right? So that's why he calls it acts of survival. Because if the choice is between starving to death or stealing to eat, everyone's going to steal to eat because that's how we survive, right? So crimes of resistance are different. He talks about how some poor and working class youth engage in these crimes of resistance, which is more about protesting against their economic conditions, right? So kind of like tagging up the local area, destroying property, things like that, are just more about being angry about being shut off from legitimate opportunities, from not getting a fair shake in this world, that it manifests itself sometimes in crimes that are so minor and seem stupid to the adults, like, you know, carving your name into something or spray painting something or breaking something inane, right? But only because they're really trying to push back against a system that doesn't recognize them as people. All right, when it comes to perspective of adults, the adults in the, you know, that these youth are interacting with, they think that the youth are stupid, right? They think that, like, why would you break a rule that you're most surely going to get caught for that doesn't actually give you any rewards, right? Like stealing the potato chips, right? Taking a bag of potato chips when this person knows who you are, you go to this place every day, and there's probably some sort of surveillance, right? Like it's very plain as day, you did this kind of crime. And what is the reward? A bag of chips? Like there's not much of a reward that you get for the act that you're doing. So the adults see this as like a, you know, kind of logic situation. So if you're looking at it as from the logical eyes of an adult, someone who's past the age of 25 and your brain is done forming, then yeah, it seems really stupid. Because like, why risk it? You know? But coming from these kids, it makes sense because, you know, they see it as a whole different thing. So kind of getting to that next question, why did Mike steal the chips? He did it because he wanted to redeem himself, right? When you're being disrespected and respect means so much because you have so little else, then sometimes people fight back and push back and resist in ways that are, again, very stupid. Like he got literally arrested for stealing that bag of 25-cent potato chips, right? But he thought it was worth it. Why? Because then the store owner treated them differently, not quite as conflicted as before, right? Then he felt like he got more respect. He got more power back out of that situation from being in a situation where he had just been disrespected and treated badly in front of all of his friends. So yeah, basically when you feel ashamed about something like this and you're taught that you can't necessarily go through the normal middle class channels to, you know, address any of your concerns, then how are you going to get power in situations if you don't take it, right? That's what a lot of these youth feel. All right, moving on to building and breaching reality. Okay, humans as meaning makers. Just the idea that we make our meanings, like we create theories out of pretty much everything, right? Like even if you find the most inane thing, like a random television show, there'll be like 10,000 people that have made like fan fiction about it or written blogs or gotten like real in depth about like the theories and underlying views of, Real Housewives, which you're like, no, it's all trash. So, we want to interpret stuff so we don't just like think randomly. We develop these really complex ways to try and understand the world. And they often have this underlying logic and coherency. So even when you're looking at like ideas like different theological myths, you see that they still have an underlying logic and coherency, even though it's like, flying spaghetti monster or whatever. There's still some underlying logic and coherency to it. And so part of this is just that we're always going to keep trying to understand what we're seeing, so we have working theories about what's happening around us. So it's not just enough that there are already established theories about what's happening, but that we're always constantly evolving those theories and developing new ones to understand the things that we're experiencing right now. Common sense is just a shared cultural rules for making sense of the social world, right? And so this is extremely important, so much so that we don't even question it. It just becomes common sense. It just shows how much it's, the kind of foundation of our cultural knowledge. Breaching is just when you make the underlying structure of reality explicit so that people can't ignore the take it for granted rules that are kind of underlying that maintenance of reality, right? The idea that reality isn't something that just exists, it's something that's maintained. So we do that when a breach happens. Typically we have ways to kind of smooth it over, right? So when people are confronted with a breach, usually they'll try to ignore it. They'll be like, oh, he didn't mean to say that, right? Or if they do think they meant to say it, they would look around to other people like, this is weird, right? Someone else has got my back. This is weird, right? So they look around to others to try and understand it. And then the third is if they can't do either one of those for breaching, they'll just laugh it off. Like, oh, well, that must be a joke, right? Because we want to kind of establish the comfort, the expected reality can be restored. So, breaching is just when you kind of force someone to acknowledge that there are all these kind of weird taken for granted things. So like, for example, in the social breaching experiments, one of them was they went into a grocery store and took items out of people's carts instead of off the shelves. So a taken for granted expectation is like, once something's in your cart, it's yours. You're taking it home with you. But technically you haven't bought it yet. It's not yours. So, basically, when someone breaches, there's got to be ways to kind of smooth over the interaction, but these students were taught to not let the people smooth over the interaction. Meaning if someone asks, well, why are you doing this, right? You don't say, oh, I'm sorry, I thought it was my cart, right? Or something that would make sense to kind of smooth over the interaction. You do something that challenges the entire taken for granted notion. So instead of saying, oops, sorry, I thought it was my cart, you say, oh, because it's easier to take it from your cart than get it from the shelf. Right? Because that's obviously not acceptable. So anyway, or another one was like they went into McDonald's and ordered a Whopper. And then after the person kind of got frustrated and then the next customer came up and she ordered a pizza, right? Two things obviously McDonald's does not carry. So anyway, those are some of the UCLA social breaching experiments I'm going to ask a question about. So self-fulfilling prophecy is just an event that becomes true because we think it will. And so because we think it's going to happen, we act in a way that actually makes it happen. So this could be like you think you're going to have a fight with, your awful cousin at Thanksgiving or whatever it is, right? Or Christmas. And so you think it's going to happen, so you act in a certain way where you're like standoffish and you don't want to interact with them and you're like, ugh, and you're short-tempered and whatever, and that actually makes the fight happen. Does that make sense? So there's like a lot of self-fulfilling prophecies where it's just we think it's going to happen, so we act in a way that actually makes it happen. Medicalization is just how we don't question the institution of medicine, right? And really just how we determine that some things are considered personal issues and some are considered medical issues, right? Like for a long time, we didn't consider abuse a medical issue. We saw it as like a personal family issue behind closed doors, none of your business kind of thing. Or like I think another one in the reading, they talked about the ideas of weight and obesity, right? That to be obese in the Victorian era was like sought after because a lot of people were not getting enough food. So it was considered kind of more of a sex symbol thing, especially if you look at like art of the time period. You see a little bit rounder of a woman as the ideal, versus nowadays, we consider obesity to be a health crisis largely because of the horrible way that our eating habits have devolved, that we all eat a bunch of like high fructose corn syrup and salt and fat and sugar and all this crap that's really packed into our processed foods that our body can't really metabolize. And yes, so really it's how we will define something as either a beauty standard or a health problem depending on the era that it happens in, right? Or how we medicalized homosexuality, right? We said it was a psychological disorder, right? Or, and they still do this to trans people, right? They have like gender dysmorphia or like other things like that that are considered psychological disorders that were in the DSM as related to just categories of people that are marginal. So since they're not the norm, there must be something medically wrong with them. And it just depends on how they're determined in the culture to either be just someone who's different or a medical aberration. Cultural production is just basically how we, okay, how do I say this right? It's kind of complicated, but basically it's a process, right? Where there's going to be people in a culture that have their ways of understanding things, right? And so they are going to press for their definitions, and really trying to establish definitions of those shared cultural symbols, right? So when we look at an American flag, that we understand the concept that underlies it, right? That, you have some people, though, within those groups, or some groups, or just some individuals, have more power or authority to project their definition on others. It's kind of where we get into those hegemonies, right? So people at the top of the hegemony, meaning people who are white, and a racial hegemony, people that are male, are cisgendered male in a gender hierarchy, people that are, able in a disability hierarchy, right? People that are Christian in a religious hierarchy, right? Et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. That there's all of these kind of hierarchies, people that are wealthy in a social class hierarchy, that they have more power and prestige and they have more worth in the culture because they're higher in the hierarchies. So they have more of an influence on dictating what it is that we all agree to as reality or culture. So hopefully that makes sense. That was like a long-winded way of saying it. Hegemonic practices, okay, that says if, but it should say of. Anyway, long semester. Of inequality. It's just that, obviously, how do hegemonies survive, right? Why is it that we still have white supremacy and patriarchy and all this other crap, right? It's mostly because we learn scripts about how we're supposed to live. And so we follow them, right? And there's different scripts if you're a man or a woman, or if you're a person of color, or you're white, or you're rich, or you're poor, or whatever it might be. So we learn to act differently, to expect different rewards, to see the world differently. And so this kind of preserves those hierarchies over time. And so those realities basically will say that, if we're going to change them, because we can, right? We can always challenge hegemonic practices of inequality, but we don't realize we can because largely we're just following the roles and scripts that have been given to us from our families, from all those other, institutions that socialize us. And so if we want to change them, we have to actually do so in a more like performative social way. It can't be something where you just like, okay, well, I'm going to resist white supremacy in my head without expressing that to anybody. You're like, yeah, that doesn't really do anything, especially when, like, well, how much is that affecting your actions? How much is that affecting your interactions with others, right? When you want to challenge hegemonic practices of inequality, you have to do it by actually, in the interpersonal connections, challenge them. change them, right? Give more status or influence to people that are lower in those hierarchies. Or challenge the validity of those hierarchies, like challenge white supremacy as the beauty, right? Or challenge it as, who is considered inherently more, worthy or human, right? Those kind of things. So, a movement like Black Lives Matter is doing that by just even, the term itself, like the hashtag itself. Or, there's a lot of different ways that LGBTQ folk are challenging these hegemonic practices by just like existing, right? Especially during a political time period where the institutions of government are threatening to literally erase their existence, right? Just in actual existence, in that reality, out in the social world, being who you are, is actually quite powerful. Anyway, self-fulfilling prophecies. Moving on. Blah, 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 self-fulfilling prophecies. Okay, so the decisions we make, have something to do with these self-fulfilling prophecies. So that's why it says decisions. Just meaning that most of us, when we make a decision about something, we're kind of weighing what we think is going to happen. So the future is important, right? We basically think, if I do this, this may be the outcome, right? We might think about the advantages or disadvantages involved. And a lot of the self-fulfilling prophecies that we end up falling into, those kind of traps, have a lot to do with assumptions of the outcome, right? So if you're making a decision like, you're like, oh, I'm going to go to that party. Oh, no, I don't want to go to that party. That one jerk so-and-so is going to be there. And then it's going to be like, blah, right? Then you don't go. It becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy because you didn't actually attend based on your predicted outcome of something that was going to happen. So self-fulfilling prophecies always have that assumption of outcome. Like, oh, so-and-so's going to whatever. And so that actually affects the way you act. And then that actually ends up happening. All right, interpersonal conflicts have a lot to do with self-fulfilling prophecies, right? We saw that example in the reading about couples fighting, right? Every couple has had that conflict where you're sure that, yeah, maybe you're being a jerk, but you're just reacting to what that jerk did. That's more of a jerk, right? And it's not about you or your actions being wrong, or even really seeing your fault in it at all, or saying like, okay, well, it's like 51% their fault, 49% my fault, still more their fault. It's more about just seeing the other person's fault and not seeing your own. So there was that example of the couple where, the guy is expected to be withdrawn and the woman is expected to be nagging. So the guy comes home and he's like, oh, my wife's going to nag me. So he withdraws, right? Where he's like, oh, here she goes. She's going to do this. So he just kind of tunes out. And so since he's so tuned out and like a human vegetable, she's like, hey, what's going on? What are you doing? Whatever. She actually pushes more because he's being a weird human vegetable. So then he becomes even more detached vegetable-like. And then she nags even more. Like, it just becomes this perpetual loop because each one expects the other one's behavior to be something, but they only see their own behavior as a reflection or a reaction to the other person's behavior. When it's like, no, it's both of you. All right, science. Just that science is limited to what we can observe and the limits of our research methods. That's literally the question and answer. All right, voodoo death. It's just like that weird phenomenon where sometimes people will die after being cursed or breaking some sort of taboo or something where they can't explain it. It's like a self-fulfilling prophecy, like a placebo effect to another level where people think like, okay, I'm cursed, so I'm going to die. So they actually end up having like a heart attack and dying, right? It's probably mystical. No, I'm just kidding. It's not. Okay. Persistence of gender inequality in employment settings. All right. So basically, gender hierarchy is connected to the unequal structure of society. So that embeds itself in workplaces, right? So that means that no matter how much Western society has changed, right? That's kind of the first question here. The gender hierarchy has persisted, right? So it's persisted through industrialization. It persisted through women moving into more male-dominant positions or just moving into the workforce in more numbers. But largely because those gender processes operate as an invisible hand that rewrites gender inequality into like different, more modern arrangements, right? So a job might start out kind of gender neutral, but then will assign certain tasks or expectations to it, and then it becomes gendered as a result. All right, so 3 effects of goal-oriented interaction is just that, okay, so in regards to gender inequality, this is how men and women expect men to be more competent. So that's going to affect who they think should be in charge, how much money they think they should make, etc. This also means that some people are going to feel more entitled to rewards themselves based on that. Like, well, I'm a guy and I clearly do better than old Cheryl over here, so I should make more than her, right? Also the idea that men are often advantaged in a lot of these interactions in the workplace, meaning that if you're assumed to be competent, that's going to give you more competence, right? Like, if you go into a job interview, or not job interview, but like a job performance evaluation, or if you're going into like a meeting where you're presenting some of your own information, and people are like rooting for you and they think that you're smart and competent, that's going to make you feel better, which means you're actually going to, it's like a self-fulfilling prophecy, you actually end up doing better, right? It's like that kind of like having your mom be like, you're the best kind of thing that does the same deal, right? Only in like a work setting. So think about how that does the opposite though. If the expectation is that you're dumber, you're not as adept at your job, simply because you're female, that's going to affect how people, their expectations of you, and that actually can affect your performance, right? As we saw in that whole Pygmalion in the classroom thing, right? When teachers expect you to do better, you actually do better. So the interactional context matters. When people expect more from you, you actually can do more. So anyway, that just means that if you're in a situation where everyone's like, you're awesome, you're great at this, you're killing it, you're like, yeah, I am. And that's going to affect the situation to a point where you might not notice that like Cheryl over there, I don't know why I keep saying Cheryl, but Cheryl right there, that she's not getting the kudos and the applause and the whatever, and that maybe her performance that's not quite as great has to do with some of that, a reflection of a less comfortable environment that's less supportive of her, just based on this idea that like, ugh, she's not going to be able to do it right because she's female. Transition zones. Okay, so these are just situations where organizational structure is less clearly defined. So this just means like, okay, we talked about the gender process as being like an invisible hand, right? That kind of changes a random job into something that's like for men or for women. So this just means that when you're interacting in those kind of spaces, what are called transition zones, this could be a situation like a new job that's opened or like a new position that hasn't quite been labeled yet. Then often some of the tasks of the jobs will be gendered themselves, and then they'll be divvied up to be like, oh, this is more appropriate for this person, this is more appropriate for that person. So for example, like think about like the gender segregation within pretty much any like restaurant or diner, right? You have a lot more women as like hostess or server out there actually greeting people at the tables, kind of doing more of what's considered for women, like this hospitality smiling aspect. And then more of the, bussing tables, cleaning dishes, taking out trash, kind of more like physical labor part is more reserved for men, even though, women can do dishes and take out trash too, and men can definitely serve tables and be like, hi, it'll be 20 minutes. Like, it's really not a gendered thing, but we create those in those transition zones when we don't have like a specific way to say like, okay, this is a job for men, this is a job for women. We tend to look at the tasks of the job and try to gender them, and then it genders the job. So that's kind of this continual gender labeling, right? It's just that, we use a lot of gender stereotypes to say like, oh, well, the people that are making microchips are female because females are so detail-oriented and, kind of meticulous in that way, versus, men are the ones who are doing the engineering to determine what to do with those chips because they're more imaginative and, kind of adventurous of spirit. So really just this idea that we use these weird gender stereotypes to say like, okay, it's more appropriate for a guy to take out the trash or for a woman to, kind of smile politely at somebody. And so that ends up, making those things more feminine or more male, because the more we do them, the more we kind of like act them into reality. And so that kind of solidifies the gender segregation within a job, right? Like, oh, that's women's work, that's men's work. So when it comes to gender processes and expectations, again, just this idea of like, why do women keep making less than men? Well, if women are only comparing their paychecks to other women, they might not realize that they're getting paid less, right? Like the Lily Ledbetter thing we talked about. Also, they might underestimate the rewards that they're entitled to, because if they think like, oh, Bob over there is doing a better job inherently because he's a dude, then they might not think that they should be paid the same as Bob, right? And so they unintentionally accept lower pay, which then again sustains that, that inequality, right? Whether it's, just in employment and hiring, everything, which I think is another fascinating caveat she talks about too, is how a lot of times, even the kind of way that organizational structures work, like let's say they're going to look at your previous salary as an estimate for how much they're going to pay you, right? And a lot of job applications, I'm sure you filled out, you've had to fill out that thing like, how much money did you get paid at your last job? It's because they're trying to determine what you're willing to work for, which for me is hard because I worked a lot of low-wage jobs. So it was like, no, I think I deserve more than this, trust me, but I'm broke, so I have to, right? So basically, think about it. If women are overall getting paid less, and if you're basing their new incoming salary based on their old outgoing salary from another place, and men are getting paid more, they're coming in with a higher previous salary from another place, you're already starting off with an inequality of using previous salaries as a determination instead of using job classifications or positions or experience or, tenure or any of that as the actual way to determine how much someone should get paid. Right? So instead of just saying like, oh, if you get this job, it's $50,000 a year, and then you move up from there based on your merit, based on your hard work, based on how much time you put in, based on whatever, right? Or maybe, okay, you come in at $5,000 more, or $50,000 more because you have better qualifications or more experience or more whatever. But instead, if you're just saying, okay, well, this person's willing to work for $45,000, this person's willing to work for $55,000, then you're kind of cementing in those inequalities as like, oh, well, that's just what they're willing to be paid, so that's what we're going to pay them, right? So again, there's a lot of these things that seem kind of gender neutral, but in a way, because the inequality already exists, if there wasn't already an underlying inequality, then it might be fine just to do that, base it on previous salaries. But when you're doing that and there's already like such a unresearched, unspoken gender inequality going on, that can obviously cause a lot of problems. Also, the idea too that if you're a woman and you underestimate how much you should get paid, you're underestimating the quality of your performance, you're overestimating the quality of the performance of your male colleagues, that's going to affect your comfort in even asking for more money or thinking you deserve it. All right, Clue and their techniques. So Clue members use a variety of techniques to support their union mobilization. So they did like sit-ins, they did protest marches, they went into that lunch place basically inside of a hotel, went into a restaurant in there and like spoke up on behalf of the staff that worked there. They speak in public about these things at like May Day marches and blah, blah, blah. Basically, they even make big props to walk around, right? They use a lot of different techniques to try to bring about awareness about, protecting union workers and union mobilization. So the clergy's experience themselves, they felt it was very gratifying to them because they were able to put their religious beliefs into action. And so the activism was motivated by their religious beliefs, right? So practicing what you preach, basically. That's what the whole kind of concept of it was that, you can say, treat people with fairness and equality and, stand up for those that are, downtrodden and blah, blah, blah. But how are you actually doing it in your life, right? These Clue members that were clergy of various faiths saw it as a way to renew their own faith and really, again, practice what they preach. All right, moving on to Bell Hooks. Right speech of womanhood. So she talked about how in a lot of feminist circles, silence is seen as the expected speech of women. And so she thought, like, yeah, that might be true for, like, white women, or WASP, what she calls WASP, right? The white, or what is it? Wealthy Anglo-Saxon Protestant, right? Hitting up a couple of those hierarchies. But just that for Black women, it wasn't that they were told to be silent. She talked about the power of Black women's speech and these kind of, like, situations where Black women were talking to other Black women, and just how complicated and interesting and beautiful this kind of speech could be. But she said it was more about, like, just not listening to them. Like, they were allowed to speak, but no one listened. Versus white women were very socialized to, like, withhold their opinions, not talk back, not challenge, not be, kind of critical, really. And just kind of, like, smile and look pretty, right? And that's kind of her right speech of womanhood. Bill Hooks also talks about how, women could experience physical abuse as punishment for talking too much, for being too critical, for challenging someone. Even to the point where, like, it was common, and again, she's writing this, a couple decades ago, but there are situations, and this still does unfortunately happen once in a while these days, but especially like in the yellow wallpaper days and beyond, that men could have women institutionalized. Like, you could have your partner institutionalized for a 72-hour hold, because you see they're challenging you as somehow a mental illness, right? Because we expect so much that women are just subservient and go like, yes, dear, to everything, that somehow a woman challenging, saying like, no, that's stupid, I disagree with you, and etc., and like really being aggressive about it, is literally considered a mental illness. I don't have time to get into it, but just even the concept of hysteria, if you look into that whole concept, right? The root word for hysteria being, hyster, which is like the same as like basically womb or vagina. So basically like vagina crazy is a nice way to say, like, kind of its translation. Just that women were, hysterical, right? It's kind of an interesting thing. It's like, think about it. If you were put in a time machine and you were sent back to a time period or a place or a culture where your voice meant nothing and people just ignored you, what would you do? I'd get pretty damn hysterical, I'll tell you what. But anyway, I think my favorite tidbit about that whole thing is that what is the cure for hysteria? They literally created scientists, medical science, created what's now known as a vibrator. Except for the early ones looked very frightening, horrifying, like torture devices in a weird suitcase, that like women would get medical, appointments and go and have this horribly terrifying device used on them. And then like their hysteria went away, turns out. Oh, fun side note. I don't know why I included all of that. I apologize. All right. Pseudonym, Bill Hooks. Okay, so why did she pick Bill Hooks as a pseudonym? Because she wanted to make sure that she was challenging those expected social roles for women about being subservient, second class, silent, all that kind of stuff. Because basically, bell hooks means to have a sharp tongue, a woman with a sharp tongue that speaks her mind, right? Someone who's not afraid to talk back. And so she wanted something that was going to really, speak to the legacy of those women that she talked about, the kind of really interesting, productive speech of Black women that was, supportive and loving and also challenging and conflicting and whatever, that was much more complicated. That there's that defiant, assertive speech, right, of your own kind of personhood, right? Advocating for yourself and your beliefs. So talking back is just this, liberated voice, basically. Being, confident in who you are and what you think and saying it proudly, right? All right, short answer essay questions in regard to the film Out in the Night. Okay, so how does race, class, sexuality, and gender expression affect what our society sees as violent? So obviously, there's an intersectionality situation within this film, right, where the women are interpreted a certain way because of who they are, right? Where if they were affluent, heterosexual white women, they probably wouldn't have been called a gang. Right? So really what I'm looking at about here is just this kind of way that those different elements weigh in. So how does race affect our deviant classification, right? Well, we assume kind of the worst of racial minorities. We lump them in and criminalize them, right? We stigmatize them. We blame them for the social ills that they face, right? Social class is very similar and very intertwined for a lot of specific reasons, right? The lower someone's social class, the lower really their relative worth within the culture, the more that we don't give them a humanity, right? Sexuality, obviously, and gender expression, meaning that if you are not heterosexual and you don't practice that kind of compulsory heterosexuality, just as some assumption that everybody's heterosexual, then you're opening yourself up, especially for women, to violence, right? Like I know many women I've experienced that myself too, where some creep tries to hit on you and you're like, no thanks, I'm not interested. And they're like, oh, you're lesbian. And it's like, no, first of all, it wouldn't matter if it was, but also like that isn't the only reason that someone doesn't like you. But there's also this kind of knee-jerk reaction for some men that have this very, strong hostility against lesbians. And I think part of that has to do with this idea that our sexuality scripts and norms are so wrapped up in this idea that women need men for sexual contact, when even heterosexual women don't necessarily need men. So, this idea that that men are basically the essential part of a sexual act, and our heterosexual framing of these things means that we only see men as important sexually, as their sexual gratification as important, affects the way that we then interpret same-sex relationships, that we interpret women within those relationships, or women outside of those, even in heterosexuality, right? So sexuality is a big one as far as how we determine someone's worth, right? There's a lot of criminalization and stigma wrapped up in sexuality as well, right? A lot of second-class treatment, a lot of weird, messed up stereotypes and things like that. Gender expression, right? That, women are supposed to dress a certain way, look a certain way, act a certain way. Like in the film, women aren't supposed to carry a knife, which I think is complete BS. That there's certain accepted ways, like women can carry a pepper spray, or they can whatever, if it's pink and it's whatever. If men catcall in an inappropriate way, women are supposed to just like, laugh it off, or, what's that kind of thing people say, like, oh, it's a compliment. No, it's not. But anyway, this idea that women are supposed to present themselves in a very kind of specific, feminized way. So if a woman uses aggression or her physical capabilities to fight, or stands up for herself in a way like that. That gender expression, the expectation that you're going to be passive, that you're going to be weak, that you're not going to be aggressive, that you're not going to stand up for yourself, really also comes into play, right? We expect women to be victims, not victors. So we kind of have to weigh in how much all of those slices affect the way that these women were treated. So, or at least interpreted. So for that, I'm really going to look at least a sentence or so on each one. How is race affecting this? How is class affecting this? How is sexuality? How is gender affecting this? And then just a little blurb or a little blending of like, okay, so obviously if you're dealing with being a poor, black, queer woman that's expressing yourself in a more masculinized, dress and manner of, talk and appearance, how is that going to affect the overall sense of seeing someone as violent, right? Well, the more deviant you act or the more deviant identities you have, the more we basically justify violence against those people and don't see their humanity, right? So how can we challenge these conceptions in our social interactions? I don't know, treat people as human people. Really try to unpack for ourselves our own biases and prejudices about what we think about different groups of people based on, some of these unchallenged, taken for granted assumptions about how the world works. And really, how we can, in social interactions, give worth to people by just like letting them be a person, letting them express themselves in any way that they feel comfortable with, and actually letting that plurality exist instead of trying to like police them or force them into some sort of other expression that makes us feel more comfortable based on those power hierarchies. All right, so what's emotion work? Blah, blah, blah. Kind of already earlier in the thing gave you the actual definition, but whatever. Right? Trying to manage and deal with your emotions in a context where they don't really fit the expected role for a work interaction. Like if someone's giving you crap at work and you have to be like smiling or things like that, right? So I want you to define it first And then using examples from the Manage Heart reading, I want you to share a time that you had to engage in emotion work, right? So if you look back at the Manage Heart reading, she gives some pretty clear examples of like how the flight attendants are expected to manage the emotions, right? How they're trained to do so, what what kind of roles the passengers take on, what roles the flight attendants are expected to take on as far as like pretending this person's a guest in your home or any of those kind of things. So I want you to kind of use an example, explain how Hochschild said flight attendants were supposed to do something, and explain how you were expected to do something at work or school or with family or whatever it might be, but typically work is going to be the best one. But school has a lot of emotion work too, right? Like you might have a group project that's like, meh, you have to do a lot of emotion work to get through those things, or, but a lot of us really have to deal with emotion work when it comes to our boss or some of the corporate stuff. If you work for like a retailer or like, any of those kind of jobs that are pretty corporately mandated, like you have to say like, welcome to whatever, would you like to try our whatever today? Which really kind of like mechanize people. Or I had a job as a telemarketer. Yeah, I know. I was young and I know. And I had to like bother people, and how it was a lot of emotion work to laugh off being told just horrible things, like horrible profanity was used against me. People said horrible stuff, wished horrible things upon me, all because I was like, hi, can I bother you for like 3 minutes and try to convince you to get this scammy company to refinance your mortgage? So yeah, and that I totally get where they were coming from. But still, it takes some emotion work to really kind of like not be pissed off when you leave work, or like write down their address, which you totally have. So like, don't piss off a telemarketer. Or actually what I would do is I would put them on the priority list so they got called like a lot more, like weekly. Which in retrospect, not nice to do, but whatever. So emotion work is how you kind of try and manage those issues in the workplace to try to deal with the expected roles that you're given that conflict with how you actually feel. Okay, so hopefully this was helpful. And yeah, final exam.